In this video, we are going to show you how to recombobulate those discombobulated elements. Hi, I'm Kay England and delighted to be back with you on session 3 of Medallion Mastery. I think it's kind of fun, even if you aren't in the program and you aren't making this quilt, to kind of see the options you have in vintage work. So we're going to take a little look at 3 out of my collection that I think you'll enjoy seeing. The very first one you're looking at is a square within a square, which that's how, when I bought the quilt, it was labeled from the dealer that I bought it from. And this is an 1830s quilt. It's a big quilt. It's a 90-something by 100. And if you look at that big, wide stripe border, you're thinking, wow, I mean, it's every bit of 14 inches, maybe even a little bit more. But typically, a lot of the beds at that time would have had a drop. And so my guess is that main body of this was designed for that very purpose. This is big and clunky. For those of you who think your triangles all have to be 2 inches, folks, let me tell you, some of these squares are 14 inches or more. It is a very valuable quilt, and it's in pretty good shape for the time frame. The next quilt is Crown Medallion, and this is my favorite style of medallion work, where there's one or more blocks that makes up the center part, but then it just builds with different elements. First row of flying geese going around it, then it's got a border that kind of stops things like the one we're working on. Then it's got 9 patches, and then it ends up, and this is so weird, it actually ends up with flying geese on 3 sides instead of 4. So again, the only thing that I can surmise from this is this maker made this for a bed, and so there would not be a row of flying geese at the top, which would be a tuck-in or perhaps even the bottom. And then the next one is a sampler from the late part of the 19th century. And this quilt's maybe, I think it's 60 by about 80, something like that. And it's a center block, but I love the way it builds out with borders and pieced elements. In my mind, I think this must be like many of our quilts today, where you guys take lots of classes. You end up with an orphan block and you never do anything with it. This is the kind of quilt that I would build. I love the idea that there's lots of just big plain pieces of border and squares, and then all these little orphan blocks just living in there. And it is just a delightful quilt, and one that I am thrilled to own. And I don't know if you folks know or not, but I'm telling you, discombobulated is a word. It is a word, and you need to study this word, because my life is mostly discombobulated on any given day. This has been years ago. I was flying through the airport in Milwaukee, and I tell you, I walked up on this section in the Milwaukee airport that says the recombobulated area. Up at the top, that's what it says. So I expect for folks that are discombobulated and fly through the airport at Milwaukee, you can go in and recombobulate yourself, and I don't think there's a charge for this or anything. So I spent a little bit of time in there. Every time I flew through Milwaukee, I just went in there and got recombobulated, and that's what we're going to do with our triangles today, is we're going to recombobulate them. As you're looking at the quilt behind me, the block that I'm talking about is the very last row. It's kind of, many of you might recognize this as Delectable Mountain. It's referred to that occasionally. The method of how we're going to execute it today is not anything I invented. I do not know who invented it. I do know that 25 or 30 years ago in the Mary Ellen seminars, we did some of this element, some of this work. If I know who invented something, I am quick to tell you. As far as who got it in print first, I don't even know that. But it is a slick way of doing a great border or a great quilt. Now, I'm hoping that many of you watching, you're not in the program. I'm not hoping that you're not in the program. I wish you were. But you're probably going, I don't know why we watch her. We don't get anything. So what we're going to do is we are going to give you a killer little handout for making this quilt that I call simply Delectable, meaning that it's a twist on the Delectable Mountain style. And it's just a method that you can make this. We're going to show you how to cut it, how to sew it. It's free. So don't expect a big old glorious handout. It's got yardage charts and all that stuff. I'm just going to show you how to make one component, which is exactly what we're doing in the program, is we're making a component. We're going to build a border with it. You're going to build a quilt with yours. We hope you all are liking us and following us and hitting the little subscribe button and all that bunch of stuff. If you do, you already know where to find stuff. We have an icon at the kengland.com page. We have an icon that says free stuff. If it's free, folks, it's going to live in there. You got to click on that and then go in there and hunt based on what you're looking for. There's loads of things in there that are free and you can just download them all day long. So you'll be looking for Simply Delectable, and you'll be looking for a little one-page handout that has the size you cut, and it shows you how to make one of the mountains. Then you will decide how many mountains you want and how many rows and blah, blah, and what kind of border and all that good stuff. So let's make a mountain. Now, laying on the table in front of me, I have 2 sewn half square triangle units. So I have sewn these together, and now what I have to do is I have to cross cut them, and then I'll put it back together again. So one of the things that I think it's important for you to know, and this is on your handout, if you own a half square triangle ruler that is 7 inches, that will cut a 7-inch unit, then that's what you need. You need a 7-inch unit laying on the table. So if you do not have a half square triangle ruler, all you need to do is cut a 7 3/8 inch square and cut it in half. That's how you make the unit. So I'm going to show you how to make one full mountain. It takes 2 half square triangle units to make one mountain. And as you looked at the quilt, every other row starts with a half a block. So when I need only a half a block, I only need 1 triangle of those 2 colors. If you're making it scrappy like mine, then I just make some where I only do 1 of them, and that becomes my half block. Then I make a whole block of 2 that are mates. So I'm going to assume that these are, that makes sense to you, and I'm just going to make a mountain out of a pair of half square triangles that I have pre-cut and pre-sewn into half square triangles. This is one of the few times that I do press my elements when I start, because I want one side to be pressed one direction and the other side to be pressed the other direction. So I just press one to the light and one to the dark, and I leave them in an orientation that is very similar to a flying geese. See how that looks just like a flying geese unit? That's the orientation I want. So in this case, this is my background, and this is going to be my mountain, and this is the sky in the background of my mountain. You can make this any size you wanted to, but the issue is it needs to be divisible by 4 with easy math. Now, there's probably some mathematician out there that knows how to break this down into whatever those things are called. I like quarters, halves, and wholes when I'm trying to do this much repetitive work. It's not that I can't do the other folks, but it just gets more difficult, and I don't know why people like punish themselves. I can do most of anything like that, but I have found that cut to what simplifies my piecing work, and I still get a great quilt and don't have to work as hard. So in this case, I am looking at a 7-inch unit. So I happen to have a 7-inch ruler. I lay it on there, that tells me bingo, I have got perfectly sewn 7-inch laying on the table. Now, I have found as many of these as I have done, this is the easiest way for me to do it. It's 7, I half that element. What's half of 7? 3.5. My first cut is going to be to cut this in half. I have found it simpler than trying to cross-cut 4 elements. If you cut it in half, you only have to half the half. That's a song, probably. So right now, I am looking for half of 7 is 3.5. Right there is my 3.5. So I'm going to cut that one, and then I'm going to take that 3.5-inch unit, and I'm going to cross-cut it into 1 3/4, because 1 3/4 is half of 3.5. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to cut a 3 1/2, and then I'm going to cross cut into 1 3/4 and be diligent about this, because all you got to do is cut one wrong and then you get to remake another triangle unit. Okay, now I have discombobulated my half square triangles. And folks, my job now is to recombobulate my half square triangles. I think this is more fun, and I've done this with smaller elements and I've done it with larger elements. Just be sure that the math of laying on the table is easy to divide by 4. I've seen this done with 3 and I don't think it's near as attractive, but that's just a personal opinion. So you can do whatever you want to. So the key now is how we lay it out. Okay, so now I'm going to start picking up my one on the left, and it's going to be the one on the right. So it gets laid like this. And then I'm going to pick the second one up, and it looks like this. Then the third one looks like this, and you notice that I'm turning them every time. Once you do that, also notice that the orientation of these angles runs in the same direction. So now what I'm looking for is the mate to this one, and what's on my right now goes to my left. I have a brown mountain with my light background. I can certainly move those around, but let me tell you what to do. Be real careful about the moving them around, because all of a sudden you look like a mountain that had some sort of dynamite issue going on. So pay attention to your lights and your darks when you first lay them out. That orientation then should be consistent in your assembly method. So what I've done now is laid it out, and if I needed 50 different sets of these, then I would lay them all out on top of each other and just sew pairs, pairs, pairs. So let's sew that. I just picked up the first set and I'm going to sew this. And again, pay attention to the fact that with the camera angle, it may actually look like I'm sewing a little heavy 1/4 inch, but I'm not. It's just it's the best view for you. Now I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to pick up set 2. And I'm just working from to my left. You could work the other direction, just be consistent. And this is where it's important that you sew the same sets together that you cut together, because in the event that you were off a little bit, this will correct it. So now I'm going to go ahead and sew the first pair in the other side, and it's the same thing. So now what I'm going to do is take the first set that I sewed, and I'm going to partner it to its sister set, and always kind of relook at your direction. Make sure you've got everything oriented. So right here, and if you notice, all of these angles are going in the same direction. So right now, this is my background and this is my main element. So I'm going to now join set 1 together in the same method that we just used. And because I pressed my sets opposite each other, I don't have to worry about any seam allowance alignment. Everything just fixes itself. Now what I have is a left and a right unit. Every other row is going to start with a half block. So if you did, you want to make some of your half square triangles in opposite colorings so that you don't have the same thing touching, because mine's very scrappy, my main quilt. And now if I'm joining these two together to form one mountain, having pressed these the opposite direction, you can see how they're going to nest right there. And I'm going to line up here Go back to the machine, cross that first intersection. And I just made a mountain. Now look how cute that is. There it is all sewn, and in this particular case, let's say you went, oh, I wanted my mountain to be the light one. Well, this would be that you'd need another section of him. So before you sew it, make sure you know what you want to be the darkest mountain. And as you look at the picture of my quilt, it's very scrappy with mediums and darks. And if you were making just 2 colors, this wouldn't be near as much trouble for you to sew. But I love the idea that my rows that start with a half block look like that. So every other row is going to have a half block starting and ending, and then the other row will be a full element. So as you assemble, that's what you need to decide in your head. If you do all of them where they're full rows, I think you end up with a lot of clutter, but that's just personal. Now, the only other thing let me address for you, I typically do not press every unit as I'm working. I would wait until I sewed my rows together. So like if I'm making the border that's in the quilt behind me, it's a row of these guys that form a border for me, and certainly you folks could do that as well. But I wait until that row is done before I press. I have learned that if you lay out the entire quilt before you press, and as the row is done, press one row one way and the next row the other way, then everything is a slam dunk to sew. If you try to press every one of these, then you're going to be back and forth to the iron fixing things. So my suggestion to you would be a little lazy with your iron in this department until you get all done. Then you end up putting borders on it as you please. And for those of you who are members of our staycation, we'd love to see you post these quilts on the staycation page, and we'd certainly love to see you visit us on the Medallion page as well. We hope that you've enjoyed this little segue into doing a little oddball of an element, but honestly, it's something we felt, when I first did this in the Mastery quilt, I loved the element so much, and I had not used it as a border this way. But I also remembered that you folks like to have something free too. So I'm hoping that you can get into your stash, and if you've got fat quarters or pre-cut pieces left laying around, this is a great project for that. So we look forward to seeing you on the next video. In the meantime, stay safe, happy sewing, and we'll catch you later. Bye-bye.